ZHA or Zigbee2MQTT? That is the question now. Or at least this is a question for this video that I'll try to answer. And with 20k new users each month, this is probably the question for some of those new users. So let's get started. As I said, each new month we have around 20k new installations of Home Assistant. While most of them will not start with Zigbee network, some of them will, or some of the older users that are currently using Home Assistant for something else will want to expand into the Zigbee world. We will not be talking about Matter today, and we will also be not talking about the Thread, although Thread and Zigbee are related. Instead, we'll be looking at what is the better route. Should you go the ZHA route or Zigbee2MQTT? Zigbee Home Automation or ZHA is internal Home Assistant component. And as internal Home Assistant component, it has advantage over Zigbee2MQTT. It doesn't require any additional installation, it is not an add-on, you don't need separate Docker for it, also you don't need an MQTT server. So if you are just starting with Home Assistant, maybe ZHA is the best route for you. But let's go into more details. Since this is official integration, we know that 23.5% currently of active Home Assistant users are using this integration in their own setup. And this is a pretty large number. I think it's around 55 or 60,000 users. We are talking here only about users that have submitted their analytical data. So as I mentioned, ZHA has one big advantage. If you install your Home Assistant in Docker, you will already have a working ZHA integration inside your setup. You only need some kind of a coordinator to plug it in or make it available on the network where the Docker is, and you are good to go. Same goes if you are using Home Assistant OS, because Home Assistant OS actually is Docker inside the Docker inside the Docker, so this integration is out of box already available there. If you're just starting, ZHA definitely may be the best route for you. For example, on this iHost I have a Docker that is running Home Assistant. And if we go to this IP address with the port 8123, we will be greeted with a familiar Home Assistant screen. If we go to Settings, Integrations, click on Add Integration and type ZHA for Zigbee Home Automation, we can already add the device we want here. When we are already here, let's talk about the supported type of devices. ZHA officially supported following type of devices. This is EZSP or Silicon Labs Amber ZNet protocol. Those are a lot of sticks with the newer types of chips. Then we have ZNP or Texas Instruments Z-Stack. For example, CC2531 or 2562 are the sticks that are most popular. Actually, 2531 was very popular, but it is also very limited, and I wouldn't recommend to go for that $2 or $3 device. Then we have Deacons, Zgate and XB. Those devices should work with the ZHA. When you are buying a coordinator, and this is not a guide for buying a coordinator and I will not be going into differences, but I did test my fair share of different coordinators for Home Assistant or for Zigbee network. I wouldn't recommend to go with the Deacons. Not because Dresden Electronics Deacons is a non-working device or bad device. If you already have Deacon stick, sure, definitely stick with it and use it up until it dies. But if it dies, in my humble opinion, I wouldn't recommend to go with that stick. Unfortunately, that one is using the older technology, has its own limitations, and while it may still work with your Zigbee network, if you're already buying something new, I would recommend to go with something like Silicon Labs or at least the newer generations of the Texas Instruments Z-Stack, such as, for example, as I mentioned, 2562 RB stick that I'm always talking nicely because I've been using it for more than 2 years and it's working perfectly. Why I'm mentioning this is because this is one of the differences between the ZHA and Zigbee2MQTT. Additional benefit of ZHA over Zigbee2MQTT is that the developers that are developing Home Assistant are also developing ZHA. But bear in mind, this may and may not at the end be the plus. This can also be a con for this device. Why? Home Assistant is trying to follow standards. And with trying to follow standards, you will step on a couple of toes. There are devices, or I would say there are device manufacturers, that don't always play nicely or don't follow the rules or the standards. That means that out-of-box devices like that, and Aqara is notorious for things like that, may not work with ZHA. There is a way to create custom quirks, but we will also be talking about that in a little bit. And that means that ZHA will bring you perfectly working Zigbee network and perfectly integrated inside Home Assistant. There will be no surprises, and any change in Home Assistant will already be done in ZHA, so there will be no compatibility problems that sometimes do pop up with the Zigbee2MQTT. But because of that strict following of the rules, the developers also don't like to bend sideways and do things for the devices that don't follow the standards. So that also means that the devices that don't follow the standards will take a bit longer to get added to the ZHA than it would be the case with Zigbee2MQTT. Also, some devices may never end up in a ZHA, which I highly doubt, but that's simply how the things work. Unlike Zigbee2MQTT, ZHA unfortunately doesn't have a comprehensive database or a list of devices that are known to work with the ZHA. Instead, they have something, and I will be leaving a link down in a video description, it allows you to browse it manually and see if your device is on the list. If it's on the list, the device should potentially work with the ZHA. I'll mention that in a couple of seconds. And this is the web page on the GitHub called ZHA Device Handlers that is handling devices. Actually, this is a comprehensive list of ZHA quirks, and custom quirks are the pieces of code that allow the system to recognize and talk the language of that misbehaving or non-standard or just new type of the device. If your device is not supported, somebody needs to create the ZHA quirks. And here is the list of all the manufacturers. And if we go into the folder, for example, IKEA, we can get a list of all the devices that have been added by the users or developers to this custom quirks database. The good thing about this way of handling things is that when a new manufacturer is added or when new device is added and this has been merged, in the next update of Home Assistant, and that can be either major or minor update, this may at the end get pushed in a Home Assistant. If, for example, Home Assistant has 5 or 6 releases that month, that means that in one or in all of them, new devices can be brought in Home Assistant, which is unlike what Zigbee2MQTT does. But also, on the other hand, the list of currently supported devices that work nicely, that support all of the features in Home Assistant, is shorter, much shorter than it is in Zigbee2MQTT. So while ZHA may be great for anybody starting in Home Assistant, and also for the pros that want to keep Home Assistant Pro, but still want to keep the install as clean as possible, while the ZHA may be the best choice for them, you, on the other hand, may have issues that the devices that you want to add, especially if they are the new ones, are still not supported, and it will take some time for the devices to get supported in a ZHA. In all of my recent videos, where I have been testing various Zigbee devices, the new devices that have just popped up, unfortunately, ZHA either didn't support the devices, or the support for that device was very limited, and part of the functionality was missing in ZHA while it was present in Zigbee2MQTT. And this is unfortunately also a closed loop. For example, I am a new user that has just bought a coordinator, that has Home Assistant running in a Docker, everything works nicely out of box, and then I go to IKEA and buy new devices, such as, for example, this motion sensor or this door window sensor. And that sensor is not available in ZHA. I have one option, and that one option is to go to the GitHub repository and ask and plead to somebody to create a custom quirk for that device. Unfortunately, if nobody else has that device, and if it's not available in the ZHA currently, it may take a long time until that device is added. Since the Zigbee2MQTT user base is much larger, and not only people that are using Home Assistant are using Zigbee2MQTT, the rarer device you have, there is a greater chance that that device will already exist in Zigbee2MQTT database. Also, if not, if you open an issue or request on a GitHub, you may be more lucky to get support there than it is currently available in the ZHA. But I have to go back to this screen, because there is also one additional advantage of the ZHA over Zigbee2MQTT. Following radio types are fully supported, not experimental, not previews, not anything. So if you have a rarer type of device or any device on this list, you are better off with ZHA. Maybe the router or end device that you are using will not exist in the database, but at least your coordinator will work. Okay, now let's look at pros and cons of Zigbee to MQTT. Well, let's start with something that can be both pro and con. Zigbee to MQTT is not part or official part of Home Assistant. It can be added as a custom repository in add-ons, and you can install it as an add-on in Home Assistant, and most users do it like that. But you can also install Zigbee to MQTT in a Docker, separate Docker from Home Assistant. And there is also one additional thing that this allows you that the ZHA doesn't allow you. It can help content creators, but it can also help any one of you that has more than one instance of Home Assistant. For example, you have one that is running your production or your real home, and you have one that is used for testing purposes. If you want to add same devices that you have in one instance of Home Assistant also to the other instance of Home Assistant, there are some ways on how you can do that, but it's not officially supported. Since Zigbee to MQTT, as the name says, is using both Zigbee and MQTT, this installation also requires one middleware, and that middleware is a MQTT or Mosquito Broker. Mosquito Broker is actually used to get all the messages from Zigbee to MQTT, store them, and transmit them to the other parties. Other parties can be Home Assistant or Home Assistants, and this is how actually I've set up my system. I'm running my main instance of Home Assistant on the Synology DS920 Plus in the virtual machine. So I have chance to use both ZHA and Zigbee to MQTT. And since this is a virtual machine, I'm not bothered with the drivers, since it's using a pass-through for the USB port to connect the external coordinator device /CC2652RB stick directly to my virtual machine, and with that directly to the Zigbee to MQTT add-on. But it also allows me to use external MQTT server, which is not actually hosted in Home Assistant. And no, this is not something that you have to do. You can install add-on Mosquito and have everything inside your Home Assistant OS or virtual machine running on Proxmox or whatever, but I've decided to move away Mosquito out of my virtual machine. That means that even when Home Assistant is not running, my Mosquito Broker is available for other devices or other instances to talk with the broker. So the installation of ZHA is you install the Docker or you install Home Assistant OS or any other version of supported Home Assistant, and you already have internal integration. With Zigbee to MQTT, unfortunately, you have to install the add-on. And that add-on in the add-on store is not actually available from the main repository or from the main community repository. No, it needs to be added by hand, and it's called Home Assistant add-on Zigbee to MQTT. There you will find 3 versions of the Zigbee to MQTT. The version you should use, the Edge version, which is actually the latest build from Zigbee to MQTT, and you may want to use this one in one case we will be talking about in a couple of seconds. Plus also Zigbee to MQTT proxy for externally running Zigbee to MQTT. Besides that, as I mentioned, you also need to install Mosquito. This is the official add-on Mosquito Broker. The communication will go like this. Device will tell Zigbee to MQTT that it is turned on and in the 50% of brightness. This will be then forwarded to MQTT. MQTT will then forward that information to Home Assistant, and Home Assistant will know that device is in that state. When you turn the light off, this message is sent to the broker, MQTT, and then broker passes it to Zigbee to MQTT. If, for example, at that moment Zigbee to MQTT is not working, the message will be held at the broker, and as soon as the Zigbee to MQTT pops up or awakes, it will forward the message and the light will change state. And this is a great thing because, as I mentioned, you can use multiple instances of Home Assistant and attach them to the same instance of MQTT. So, in my opinion, ZHA wins over Zigbee to MQTT, but partially, because with the external MQTT, we also have ability to connect other instances to share the same devices with the main instance of Home Assistant. So half a point for ZHA and half a point for Zigbee to MQTT. But one thing that Zigbee to MQTT is winning over ZHA is the database of currently officially supported devices. It is 3,398 devices that are supported from 402 different vendors. I think that currently there is no vendor producing any Zigbee device that it is not already in this database. But also, for example, some DIY or community projects are also listed here and can be used with Zigbee to MQTT, but they are probably not supported directly with the ZHA. For example, one of the DIY devices that I'm using and I've created video on is this DIY Geiger-Miller counter, the Zigbee version, and it's also available and supported in ZigBee2MQTT. But that's not all. For each of the devices that is in the database, such as this one here, which is actually a DIY device, not a commercial product, you also have a list of all the things that are exposed. And at a glance, you can see what you can do or what you can get from that device in a Home Assistant. This is something that unfortunately ZHA is lacking, and that's one of the reasons I prefer myself using ZigBee2MQTT over ZHA. I know that creating and maintaining such a database is a tremendous job, but I think in Home Assistant community, ZHA devs could potentially offload that task to the community members, and I know that a lot of community members would contribute to create this same database for the ZHA devices. But in my case, this is one big point for the ZigBee2MQTT over the 0 points for ZHA. Let's go back to this ZHA screen that shows you the supported devices, because next I will show you the list of supported coordinators for the ZigBee2MQTT. The list may be longer, but maybe this one is better. Let's check that one out. This is the list of supported adapters. Here we are talking mostly about the coordinators, but a lot of those devices can be used also as routers. We have devices based on the Texas Instruments CC2652 or CC1352 chip. These are the USB connected, hybrid, which is a network plus USB, network devices, Raspberry Pi hats, development modules, hubs, and other devices. Then we have a list of not recommended devices. For example, the best case is this CC2531, which is actually a device I'm still using in one of my installations. It's working perfectly, but simply that device is not powerful enough. So this device is not recommended, but it's still working. And then the funny part, the experimental part. These devices are currently still in the experimental phase. I think that they have been in experimental state for over a year or year and a half, maybe even 2 years, I'm not sure. I'm sure for 1 year. And those are a lot of the very popular, very cheap and very nice devices, such as for example Sonoff Dongle Plus or ZB Dongle E, Z-Wave Me, and some others. These devices may work, or these devices will probably work for your install, but as they are experimental, you may have some issues with them. And a lot of those devices are actually supported, and I wouldn't even say supported but preferred for the ZHA. For example, Home Assistant Sky Connect. Don't worry, I've been testing Sky Connect for a long time and it's working perfectly with ZigBee2MQTT. But this is my test network, it doesn't have a lot of devices and I didn't have any issues. So while we have newer chips available out of box in ZHA, we have experimental support for them in the ZigBee2MQTT. Again, I'm not saying that those devices will not work, but it simply means that the device support wasn't baked for long enough, and you may see a bug or two. In my opinion, this is one additional point for ZHA over the ZigBee2MQTT. One thing that ZigBee2MQTT shines over ZHA is, as I mentioned, the support for the unsupported devices in ZHA. The list of newly supported devices in each release is very comprehensive. While I myself have created a couple of custom quirks for the ZigBee2MQTT to add support for devices that were such new devices that they didn't exist in ZigBee2MQTT, the process was, in my opinion, a bit simpler, but still not simple enough. With the latest release of ZigBee2MQTT, and this is the version 1.35.0 that was released on the 1st of January or 2nd of January, there are some additional changes that unfortunately I don't think that ZHA can match at this time. And this is this paragraph here. This release contains a quite fundamental change on how ZigBee2MQTT handles unsupported devices. ZigBee2MQTT will now attempt to automatically detect features supported by the device and discover those to, for example, the front end and Home Assistant. This means that if you, for example, pair an unsupported light, there is no need to wait for official support. Basic features will work out of box. I don't know how, but nobody's talking about that, and this is such an awesome addition to ZigBee2MQTT. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to contact the author because I wanted to do a special video just on ZigBee2MQTT and just on that specific functionality, because in my opinion, this is something that the community that is using ZigBee2MQTT, but not just ZigBee2MQTT, should be talking about. We now have a auto whatever that allows us to add unsupported device out of box. So besides already having extended database of devices, now even devices that are not supported out of box will be at least partially supported working until the full support is brought in the probably the next release of ZigBee2MQTT. But that's also one of the issues with ZigBee2MQTT. I mentioned that ZHA can publish update to the device list database or push those custom quirks with any update to Home Assistant. So for example, and unfortunately if there are a lot of bugs, there are a lot of releases for Home Assistant, 2, 3, 4, 5 per month. I know that a lot of people don't like that many releases, but they can also bring new additional devices to Home Assistant if you're using ZHA. For ZigBee2MQTT that has changed some time ago, and now there is only one official release for ZigBee2MQTT each month, and that is usually on the first day of the new month, 1st of January, for example. So if any new device is brought on a 5th or 10th or 15th, usually you will not see support for that device until the next month. There is a way you can use the Edge version, but most people are not using Edge release of ZigBee2MQTT, instead they are using a full official release. There are some cases when there is a new version of ZigBee2MQTT pushed, even before the new month, and that's unfortunately when there are some serious bugs, like it was in the January this year. Only a few days after 1.35 was released, we had 1.35.1 released that had some hot fixes to fix stuff that was broken in the latest release. But this is not something that you see each month. While ZHA may get a point for faster updates or faster possible updates, I'm not saying that each release or minor release of Home Assistant is bringing support for new devices, but it has option to do so. In my opinion, this auto-discovery gets at least 2 points for ZigBee2MQTT. Counting points was just more of a joke than really counting points for each of them, because each installation, ZHA and ZigBee2MQTT, have pros and cons. And there is no simple way to say, I really recommend for you to go to ZHA. For the new users, this may be better options, but in long term, ZigBee2MQTT may be better, especially with this new functionality that is currently not available and I don't think we will be seeing very soon in ZHA. When people ask me, what do you prefer, I say to them, remember that some devs from Home Assistant were pushing a lot of commits to ZigBee2MQTT, and some devs are using ZigBee2MQTT instead ZHA. So there is actually no clear answer, but don't limit yourself. For example, let's go to integrations on this system, and if I scroll down, we can see that I have here yellow multipan, which means that I've enabled Matter, but it doesn't matter for this video, that has ZHA active on this system. There are some of the devices I'm currently testing on this ZHA installation. But also, this system has ZigBee2MQTT, and these are the test devices for the ZigBee2MQTT. So yes, you may actually have more than one Zigbee network in your home. You can use both ZHA and ZigBee2MQTT. There are a couple of use cases that pop on my mind. For example, if you have a large home and you also have a barn or garage that is not attached to the house, you can have one network in your home, and then, for example, use a device like this that has a network cable attached to expand your network, for example, with ZigBee2MQTT on another location. Home Assistant allows you to be flexible, and you can run, as I said, both of those instances. In my personal opinion, currently ZigBee2MQTT is much better than ZHA. And remember, ZigBee2MQTT is actually not limited to Home Assistant. There are other open source smart home softwares that are using ZigBee2MQTT. So while maybe a majority of the ZigBee2MQTT users is Home Assistant, there are other systems that are also using it. And this is not something that can be done with the ZHA. In my home, we are using ZigBee2MQTT as a primary Zigbee network. But as I said, I have also a couple of ZHA networks because I now try to test each and every single Zigbee device that I receive with both ZHA and ZigBee2MQTT. Just so that when I review those devices, I can tell you if at the time the video was recorded, they are both supported by ZHA and ZigBee2MQTT. One additional source that I would definitely recommend for you if you're starting with the ZigBee2MQTT and if you are looking for specific devices is to go to the Blakadder's Zigbee Device Compatibility Repository. This repository has 50% of the devices that are currently available in the ZigBee2MQTT. But here on the first glance you can see if the actual device is supported with ZHA, Tasmota, ZigBee2MQTT, Decons, Zigbee for Domatics, or IO Broker Zigbee. And one thing that you may notice is that this ZigBee2MQTT sign is available on 99.9% of devices. Just not this device here. This database can also help you select device that will actually fit in your system. So if you're planning to buy a Zigbee device, go check out on two places. One place is this Blakadder's repository, which I'll be also leaving a link down in the video description, but also ZigBee2MQTT database to see if it's available or if it's supported in that database too. I know that a lot of you will be disappointed with the video, but unfortunately I'm unable to tell you which one of them is better. Each of the installation types, ZHA, ZigBee2MQTT, have their own pros and cons. It's up to you to weigh in and decide what way or what route you want to go. In my personal opinion, if you are starting with a home assistant, I would definitely recommend to go with the ZHA. But before you buy devices, check online on the community forums or Twitter or somewhere else to see if that specific device is already supported with ZHA or not, before you buy it. If you actually buy a device and then figure out that the device is not supported in ZHA, you have always option to switch from ZHA to ZigBee2MQTT. But I also want to hear your opinion. Why do you like ZHA or ZigBee2MQTT, or why don't you like ZHA or ZigBee2MQTT? What things would you want to change in either one of those solutions? And actually to hear what solution are you using and are you happy with it? And what made you go that route? Was it the device compatibility? Was it the issue with the coordinators? Was it, on the other hand, simplicity of the installation? What was the reason for you to select whatever route you selected? So give me your opinion and drop me a line down in the comment section below. And if you did like this video, don't forget to give me a like. This type of video is very new to me. I'm usually doing videos where I show you how to do something or test something. Here I'm just talking and actually not doing anything. But there is one additional video I will be releasing very soon, hopefully maybe next week. And for that one I also need your help. I will be doing a video on companies that are currently on the blacklist of the home assistant users or smart home users. We all know the problems with the Mazda, the problems with the MyQ, but we also had Hyder problems last couple of days where they requested the pull down from a person that created the integration for Home Assistant. So instead of them trying to see how they can work with the open source software, how they can help the community, they decided that they want that piece of code removed so that everybody is using their cloud services, no local API, nothing, and they can benefit for it maybe by, getting a subscription in the future or something like that. If you know of any company that is doing the same, if you have a preference or if you have a list of companies that you will not be buying your products in the future, I would really love to see them in the comment section below, because I really want to do a video on the companies that are currently blacklisted and what are the reasons why those companies are blacklisted. For example, as Life360, which integration was officially closed because they prefer to sell your data to third parties than allowing you, the users, which data they actually are selling, to get access to it from Home Assistant. And for the end, I also want to thank all those wonderful people that are supporting me and that have become YouTube channel members. Thank you all for all of your support. But let's not forget each and every one of you who has watched, liked, subscribed, commented or shared my videos. I really do appreciate every single one of you. If you too want to support the channel, you can do so by clicking the join button down below or going to my merchandise store. But there is also option of doing super thanks, and I will be super thankful for that. I will be seeing you next time. Until then, bye bye and have fun.